Thank you very much, Dr. Reed. First, giving honor to God and to our Bishop, Charles Blake, and to the Board of Bishops, to all of the clergy and all that gather here tonight for this historic gathering. Let me say that it is important that we understand that God does not make mistakes, and God doesn't stop because we get despondent. Several months ago, Martin Luther King III and I talked about coming to Memphis to have a recommitment march on tomorrow. We felt that for 39 years we had looked back at what happened. We need to start committing ourselves toward what we're going to do going forward. I agree with Reverend Reed. We must know where we come from, but we also must plan on where we're going. And as we began to organize it, Dr. Richardson and Reverend W. Franklin Richardson, who chairs the Board of National Action Network, is with me tonight, and Freddie Haynes and Rudy McKissick and Reverend Dwight Jones. We voted to bring the whole National Action Network convention here. At the same time, we started hearing that Bishop Blake was going to call a Pan-African Congress together to come together and deal with our families and deal with the destruction of our young people. The reason we feel that is important is if we just go to the Lorraine Motel tomorrow to remember what happened and not deal with where we're going to be 40 years from now, then we missed the point of Dr. King and what God did with Dr. King. Fact of the matter is that if we are to be effective, we've got to analyze where we are and how we got here. We asked Bishop Blake to help us lead that march to Martin, that Martin and I will do tomorrow, because Bishop Blake has come with the missing piece with this Pan-African gathering. And what is the missing piece? If you go in your Bible, there was a people that was in bondage just like us. They had to make brick with no straw. They had to work with no wages. They suffered and labored, and God finally delivered them. They got to the banks of the Red Sea and gave up. Some of the Uncle Tom Israelites said, "Moses, you brought us out here to die." And God told Moses, "Just stretch your rod," and God made dry land in the middle of the Red Sea. They walked through dry land in the sea and made it over to the wilderness. But as soon as they got in the wilderness, they forgot the God that brought them across. And what was a 4-month journey took them 40 years. Not because God moved the promised land, but because they got lost in the wilderness. And after 40 years of wandering, 40 years of destroying their families, 40 years of worshiping golden images, doing the bling bling in the wilderness, 40 years of forgetting the God that brought down Pharaoh, finally after 40 years, when they remembered the God of their fathers, then God said, "Now you can cross the next river into Jordan." We didn't come to Memphis to just talk about how we got across the Red Sea. We got to deal with how we got lost in the wilderness. So as Martin and I said, well, we got to get across the Jordan, Blake said, yeah, but we can't get there till we find out why we got lost. We got to rebuild the family. We got to redirect the children. We got to give up this bling bling. We can't get there till we get the wilderness out of us. That's why media want to know whether we together. Only way we going to come out of this is if there's some of us that understand the Jordan, and if Blake can get the wilderness out of us. None of y'all think it's new school or it's hip talk. It ain't nothing but wilderness talk. Mama raised you by yourself. You call her a hoe. Wilderness talk. Making babies you ain't gonna raise. Wilderness stuff. No time for church. No time for school. Wilderness talk. Selling dope on the corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard. Wilderness talk. So we need those that will minister to us to get the wilderness out of us. Before we lead that march tomorrow, I went over, Bishop, and stood out in front of the house of this man that shot 6 members of his family. Because unless we get that mentality out, we can't get across the next river. Lest we stop this killing and self-hate and this denouncing of our women, both here and in Africa, we can't get there yet. So thank God Bishop Blake had the vision and the courage to correct us, because if he didn't, we would never come out. It is time, 40 years later. We've been in the wilderness now 40 years. We've been wandering around and arguing about nothing and ego tripping and backbiting and backstabbing. It's time now to ask God to forgive us of our wicked ways, to ask God to have mercy on our flawed soul, to reconnect our families, to bring our children back. And if God be for us, starting tomorrow together, we're going to head toward the Jordan, because the same God that brought us across the Red Sea, the same God can bring us on. Let me say this. I started in the Church of God in Christ. I didn't understand how important growing up in church was till I got older. I told Bishop last night, there were gangs in them days. But my mother had the sense to bring me to church and put me in another gang called the Church of God in Christ. I remember that night Emily Bram was singing at Washington Temple. And she was talking about if you put your hand in God's hand, he'd make a way. It didn't make no sense to me then. But the older I got, the more I learned them words would come back to me, that there is a God that'll make a way out of no way. And he'd make your enemies your footstool. I remember, Bishop, and I'll close on this. And I would hope that you join Bishop and Martin and I tomorrow as we start this march at City Hall. This is not a march of memory. It's a march of future. Jeff Johnson, stand up, Reverend Jeff Johnson, yours behind, he wasn't old enough to even be born when King got killed. I was too young to be here. This is going to be led by those of us that couldn't have been here 40 years ago. But it's going to show that God can go from generation to generation. Now I remember, Jeff, when I was young and hip in high school, I used to bring my friends to Washington Temple to church. And I used to always say to myself, coming to church, I hope Mama don't shout tonight. Because I used to be ashamed of Mama shouting, Freddie Hank. And Mama used to have this little shout. She'd lean to the side and jump up and down. And I'd try to hide down in the pew. But I remember Bishop Washington preached one night, and all my best friends was there, Rivers, and I was just sitting there nervous. And sure enough, when Timothy Wright hit the chord, Mama got up. I knew what was coming. I just braced myself, and he hit it again, and Mama started leaning over and shouting. But I didn't realize Mama had to shout through feeding me with Daddy gone, and shout through putting clothes on my back, and shouting through praying me through, and putting books on the table. But you know, I'll tell you this, about 25 years later, they let me speak at the Democratic Convention in Boston. Sister Daughtry tell you, I spoke 20 minutes longer than they wanted, and they wanted to shut me down, but the audience kept standing up clapping, and the whole nation could hear me speaking. People that despised me would applaud me. And when I came down the stairs in the back and my family was waiting outside, I said to one of the security guards, you got a men's room I need to use before I go outside? He said, yeah, go right in there. I went in and I closed the door and I locked it, and I leaned to the side and started going up and down. know why mama shout, because there's a God that'll be food when you're hungry. There's a God that'll be water when you're thirsty. There's a God that'll make a way out of no way. He's my rock, my sword, my shield. I know why mama shout, and I'm going to shout through Memphis tomorrow, because God will